Most restaurant owners are trapped, working crushing hours, missing their kids growing up, and wondering if all this sacrifice will ever pay off. But there's a better way. Welcome to the Restaurant Growth Accelerator podcast, your blueprint for transforming your restaurant into a profitable, scalable business that runs on autopilot. I'm your host, Andrew Scott, and in each episode, I'll show you exactly how to build the restaurant business of your dreams while getting your life back. So let's dive into today's episode. Hey everybody, welcome to the Restaurant Growth Accelerator podcast. I am your host, Andrew Scott, and I am here today with Nathan Voulgaris. Now, Nathan has been working on our team for a couple of years now, and he comes from being the regional manager over 8 restaurants with over 700 employees doing about $60 million in revenue annually. And so we are lucky to have him on, and basically he's going to be a regular guest with us. And we'll be talking about all things, whether it be kitchen-oriented, restaurant-oriented, leadership-oriented. But he is now our special projects director, basically coming up with a lot of our really cool tools and systems that we use to help our restaurant owners make more money. So, Nathan, let's dive into it. Today, we are talking about 5 ways to cut your food costs. So welcome. Happy to have you on here. Is there anything I missed in introducing you?
No, I think that's the most relevant stuff. I think it's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Well, let's dive in. Oh, you're a Red Seal chef as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I am. I got a whole bunch of really expensive wallpaper. It doesn't necessarily matter for the conversation, I guess.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into it because, as you know, food costs, there's 2 main costs that go into most restaurant owners. Their food and their labor costs. Those are the big ones that we can control. But the only problem is a lot of restaurant owners have food costs that are inching up because, let's face it, products more expensive now. Everything just keeps going up. Obviously, labor goes up as well. Profit margins are shrinking. I mean, there's a lot of tough stuff that's happening with restaurants, yet we are still able to help people get up to 15, 20% profit margins and beyond to bring their food and their labor costs down to 55% of sales. Most people, when I say that, go, how do you even do that without pricing yourself out of the market, or how can I possibly do that? Because they don't know. And so what I wanted to do today is just share a few quick tactics that we can use that are going to be able to help people in their journey to cut more from their food cost budget without sacrificing quality and add more to their bottom line. So let's dive into it, man. Let's hit it up. Number 1, let's go.
Yeah. So, I mean, before we dig into it, I guess here's what I would say about food cost, right? It is, like you said, it's one of the biggest costs in the business. Food cost and labor are the 2 big ones that we need to look at. Those are our 2 biggest costs. You probably spend an awful lot of time looking at your labor, but how much time do you spend really looking at your food cost, and how do you do it? So here's my top 5. The first thing I would say about food cost, though, is that it's not something that we do when it's broken. It's a habit. It's something we have to look at as frequently as we write a schedule. Now that can sound kind of scary. So hopefully I can break this down into a few pieces that.
So what you're saying is we shouldn't do it, every 3 years or 5 years or.
Oh, dear God, no.
Okay. Just checking. Because I mean, a lot of people think, hey, we did our menu, we did a little work around it then, and now we're good for the next year. We're good for the next, little while. And some people do it when it's broken. And so what you're saying is we should actually have eyes on it more often than that.
Absolutely. Some things can have a little bit of time between them. Other things need to happen on the regular. So I'll talk about that a little bit as I talk about the top 5 as well, because some things are easy to do, fast to do. Some things take time. Some things have to happen 4 times a year. Some things can happen, once a year. Some things have to happen every week and potentially every day. So we should talk about all of those, I think. All right. So let's talk about the first one. And I've tried to organize these, I think, in a way that is the biggest bang for your buck, the big systems that need to be in place. So number 1, recipe costings. So whether we're talking about food or bar or anything else that we sell within the business, there has to be a plan for how are we going to build it? What's in it? What is it going to cost us to execute it? What is the, and I'll stick with food as the specific example, but what is the plated food cost of this particular item? If we don't know that, we're never going to know exactly what we have to charge for it in order to actually turn a profit. it's really easy for us to say, you know, we could have this amazing steak on the menu. We're gonna sell it for this price, but if it's not producing a profit, it doesn't belong on the menu. Kind of as simple as that.
And I was going to say something too. If we don't know what it costs, then we can't actually get our theoretical food, and we can't compare that to our actual. And so as I'm talking about this, I'm sure a lot of people are like, well, what do you mean theoretical versus actual? So basically, when you know what each thing is supposed to cost, you can actually run a report based on what you actually sold as to what your food cost should be at the end of a period, whether that be monthly or whatever the case, weekly even. And then you go back and say, okay, so it should have cost us this much. Now, how much did it actually cost us in our profit and loss? And then you go, okay, is the issue one of pricing, where we're not priced properly? Is the issue one, you know, where the menu needs to be altered? Or did we cost it right and someone is walking away with a, you know, backpack full of steaks at the end of the shift? Or do we have too many comps? Or is it a situation where there's a lot of mistakes going on, right? But you don't know that information. It's like when your food cost is over, there could be a million different places where to go for. You don't know which one it is. And so this really helps you figure out, okay, is it a me problem, or is it a systematic problem in the way that we've structured these menu items, right?
Yeah. And I like the way you say that, a systematic problem, because again, if we don't have a recipe that says, you know, 2 ounces of cheese on this pizza, how do we train it? How do we teach people to put 2 ounces of cheese on it? So yes, from
my 2 ounces might be different than your 2 ounces. And actually there was this one client we had one time, it was before your time, and I forget his name. We'll just call him John. And basically he used to make these nachos for this one client, and it was supposed to have a certain amount of stuff, but John had really big hands. He was like a big guy. And so when he was making these nachos, he literally would like put handfuls of everything, just throwing it on there. And these nachos would end up being double the size. And so that's why people came. But it turns out they were losing $5 every time he made the nachos. Like literally straight up lost $5 every time, because, you know, he's just throwing the steak on there, just throwing everything on there. And when they finally realized that, they were able to figure that out. And they actually still kept it on the menu, but they had to basically double the price of it. So finally they could actually make a profit. But you don't know otherwise, right? Because there's no clarity around it.
That's right. And what you don't know will kill you when it comes to food costs. It will eat all of your profit 100% of the time. So I guess what I would say around the recipes is that, you know, I think I said at the beginning of this recording that I would tell you, you know, the things that take time. So if you don't have recipes written, it's going to take you time to do it. We have to capture exactly what we want the dish to look like, exactly how much of what goes in it, exactly what those ingredients cost, where they're coming from, in order to train it, mitigate it, and actually do something about that costing. And even more importantly, arguably, it creates consistency. If it's 2 ounces of cheese on this pizza or this nachos in your example, how do we make sure it's always the same? It's not just when John was working. It's every time I go into that restaurant, I get exactly what I want, right?
Yeah, because inconsistency will actually damage your reputation more than anything else.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's good sometimes, but on Fridays it's terrible, right? They got a bad grill cook working or whatever.
Well, let me share this. Like, we used to have this happen all the time where we had an allotment of cheese. Everybody's like, I remember someone came in and asked me once, like, what are there, like, cheese police preventing you from putting more cheese on? We would have portioned out cheese on the products we serve. And then, and basically what'll happen is the client would ask, oh, well, you know, could I just like have some extra, you know, this one time? And so we'd give them like some extra cheese that one time. And then all of a sudden next time they come in and be like, well, that person did it for me, so now you're the problem. And now it just affects the brand because we're just not consistent.
That's right.
You know?
That's
so
right.
it's easily something like that. But so you're mentioning this takes time, and as we know, restaurant owners have all the time in the world. So let me ask you this. Say I am a restaurant owner and I don't have a whole lot of time, but I still want to find out some of this information. What is the best way to do it? Or is there a shortened version that I can do that I can at least get some data more quickly on this?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I would first of all be looking at, you know, what are your sales for food cost or for food, I should say, and what are your purchases for food cost? What are your food purchases, and what is that variance? So if you divide your purchases by your sales, you're going to come up with a number. What is that number? Well, that's going to be your actual food cost. Now, some of that is sitting on your shelves, and some of it is on your line, and some of it is being used. So it's not a true food costing. What I'm talking about with recipes is a true plan per plate costing. But that's simple math to tell you whether or not you are within the acceptable range for your concept to hit your food cost.
Yeah.
You know, if it's 40% and you hope that's good enough, well, listen, recipes will tell you if it is. It'll actually define it for you. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And I was going to say a couple things I was just thinking here, like what is an acceptable food cost metric? And so I can just share a little bit, of my experience that it depends on your concept. So say you're a quick serve restaurant, your labor is going to be lower, but your food cost is typically going to be a little higher, maybe up, 32, 33%. But when you're full serve, your labor is going to be a little higher, but your food cost should actually be lower. Like ideally, like my thoughts are if we can get it, 27, 28%, like that's a great place to be. In general, think of this rule of thumb. As food and labor combined, we want that to be about 55%. 60% is kind of like the highest, depending on what's going on. And so long as you're below that, you're generally in decently good shape. Just as back of napkin math we can use here. But I was going to say too, another way to do this a lot faster, if you want to get some recipes costed, if you don't have time to do every single one of them, just take your top 5 best sellers. Right? And just do those, and that will at least give you a rough idea as to where you're at. And once you do that, those ones, if you were to raise the price or change it or edit the, what you're putting out there, changing that will give you the biggest bang for your buck on the entire menu because they are your best sellers. They are the biggest proportion of your entire menu. So that's the easiest way to get the biggest bang for your buck right away if you're going to do the work to cost that. So that's kind of what I was thinking might be useful for some people who are like, I don't have the time to go through every menu item, but can you go through 5? And if you can get some useful data that way.
Yep, absolutely. And that's what takes so much time because there are so many things. Prep recipes, plated recipes, total processes. There's an awful lot to do. So you're absolutely right. Big bang for your buck, start somewhere. And like I said, with recipe costings, if you're starting from scratch, that might take you weeks to put together. It might take you months to put together. But when it's done if you do it the right way. Yeah. And it is probably the biggest bang for your buck when it's done. It's a system when it's done. That's something that, when I talked about frequency, I would say, doing your food costing and your recipe updates, that doesn't have to happen every week. Quarterly or even 3 times a year is doable once the system is in place. But once again, it has to become a habit once it's there. So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
You brought up, kind of, quick, big bang for your buck initiatives. Here's one that I would throw out to you that takes not very much time at all. So even if we don't know what our plated food costs are, so if we did our costings on 5 dishes and we kind of have an idea of where they are and we've adjusted our pricing, well, that still might leave a significant amount of items that we don't have costed.
Yep.
If we don't know the cost, we can still manage our sale price, right? Our menu price. Mm-hmm. So what I would suggest is something that you can do relatively quickly to manage your food costs is a true market analysis. So it sounds like kind of a fancy term, but it is exactly what it sounds like. We want to take a look at similar demographics, similar geographic locations that are serving something that is similar to your value proposition. So if you're a burger place and there's a bunch of other burger places in your immediate vicinity or even in another town or locale, we want to take a look at, well, what are they charging? Now, this is a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses, and I get that. But if you are the lowest priced burger in the market, but you have a better burger than anybody else in the market, well, what does that tell us? It tells us that, number one, our potential customers are happy to spend at a certain point for a certain product. And if we are behind that mark, our whole value proposition is just cheap. Are you just the cheap place or are you the great place? And both of those don't, I don't want them to sound bad. You could be the cheap place. If that's your value proposition, then that's where you want to place yourself in the market. But if we can look at what they're charging, what they're giving, identify their value proposition, no matter what your food cost is, we can go right back to the menu and we can change those prices today.
Yeah. So I want to jump in here because, if being cheap is your value proposition, some of the biggest fast food places right now today are still not cheap.
No,
right.
Nowhere.
I'm not going to mention their names, but the big ones with the arches and things like that's not cheap anymore. Right. So even though they are getting, the quality of what they're getting is very, very different than what they might get with you, we're still paying a significant amount of money for that product. And so what I would say is there's no honor in being the cheapest, right? And so a lot of times clients will come to me and they'll say, Andrew, we have an issue. I can't raise my prices because, I'm afraid I'm going to lose customers. And I'll ask them like, are you a business or are you a charity, right? Because if we're a business and we're not making money and other places are charging more than you are, even though we know that your product is better, your service is better, all those things are better, then what is that doing? Because I will tell you that if your price is, say, $20, people aren't going to balk at 21, right? Like you're in the ballpark, If you went from 20 to 30, sure, there's a bit of a difference there. But typically most people don't notice anything that is less than a 10% increase when we're talking about pricing. And the other thing as well is there is a certain subset of the population that is completely content keeping you poor as a business owner. Doesn't matter. They are totally okay. They are going to go to the cheapest place and that's where they're going to go. And I would tell you that those are not the customers that are going to make you the money for you and your family. That is not the client demographic that we should be targeting. We want to be going after the people that actually are going to care about what you do and they're okay with spending what it costs to do it, right? Because if they're looking for the cheapest, they can then go to those golden arches or other places. And let's face it, that still isn't cheap. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's some hard facts for you.
Yep. And I would tell you that, for the most part, I've worked with 1,000 clients at least over the years. And I will tell you that less than 1% of the time when we've changed prices to make it appropriate to market or appropriate to your menu design or your recipes, less than 1% has ever seen any significant customer feedback, negative customer feedback in that space, I should say. It's expected. Everybody knows that everything is more expensive today. Keep up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no honor in that. And so I would say that if it's been more than 6 months and you haven't adjusted your prices, I mean, give a good look around. And I mean literally go onto the websites and literally get their images, like go to the places that are similar to you and take any similar items that you have. Even if you compare 5 or 10 items, it won't take you that long. Their menus for the most part are online, or you just go in there and have a drink and, have a nice little outing that the business can pay for. But whatever it is, go out and take a look at what other people are doing and see how well you compare, right? That's just an easy way to do it, to see what's going on in your market. Just to know, and every time that this has happened, I've had people come back to me and they're like, wow, I didn't realize how much these people were charging for less than what we're providing, right? And because we often spend so much time inside our restaurants. So that those two ways to look at pricing, either actually getting the data, but then even if you don't have the data, looking at your market analysis, combining those two things should give you a pretty good idea. Because even if your food cost is in a place where it's a little bit on the high side, but you know that you can't go up much in your market, then maybe there's other things we need to change to bring down those numbers. So we don't want to necessarily buck the trend and be that much higher than any of your competition. We want to be within that range or close to it. And by combining those two things, that will give you a pretty good idea, because it's not just one or the other, because you can't just go and charge $50 for a burger, if that's what your costing is. We still have to live within the market. So basically by combining those two, it gives you a really good idea of where your pricing should be so that you can have the highest price point without actually losing customers, which is what we don't want to happen, right? And so that's kind of what we're always looking at. You don't want to be the lowest, you don't want to be the highest, but you want to be at because there's an equilibrium. Like if you drew this on a big line, you would have the lowest price to get the most volume, or you would have the highest price to get the lowest volume. We want to find the place where you can actually get the most customers for the highest price possible without losing those customers. We want you to be there because that's the peak profitability, the peak overall revenue, and also good profitability. So that's kind of where we want to be, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And market analysis, I mean, listen, there's a lot of food cost stuff that takes a lot of time and a lot of analysis and a lot of work. Market analysis, you'll do it in an afternoon if you sit down and look at it. A couple of hours tops.
Yeah. And actually, we are bringing out a tool that we're going to make available for everybody to be able to do that. We're literally just taking the same thing we have for our clients, and we're just letting everybody have it so they can do the same thing. So that will be coming out shortly. If it's not in the episode notes, just follow us on social media or jump into our email list, and you'll get it when it comes out. But that's something we're going to be doing. So that was number 2. So yeah, let's take a look at number 3. Hey, real quick, if you're a multi-unit restaurant owner or you're looking to become one, I've identified the 3 deadliest mistakes that are killing most restaurants right now. And more importantly, I'll show you how to avoid these exact mistakes. Just grab my free copy of the Multi-Unit Restaurant Playbook by going and clicking on the link in the description below. Inside, you'll discover my proven system for building a restaurant empire that runs on autopilot and the mistakes you must avoid if you want to stay profitable and scalable. So get the free playbook and transform your business today.
Okay, so number 3, this is also a relatively quick thing to do, right? If you haven't done this, do it today. And it's an email or a phone call. So pretty easy, right?
Tell me, Nathan, tell me.
Let me tell you, here's the secret. This is what people forget, is that when, we get our products from, for the most part, broadline distributors, right? We may be, and I've had clients who go and pick stuff up at Costco in the grocery store or whatever. But for the sake of this conversation, let's say you're getting most of your products from distributors, even if it's 1 or 2 or 3. The thing to do right after you listen to this conversation is get on a phone call with your reps at those locations and say, listen, I want to talk about moving to a prime vendor agreement, or at the very least start to discuss a rebate program with you. Now, we often think that, distributors are kind of like a grocery store. That's the price. That's what I pay. That's not the case. That's the price that they're giving you. When you have volume, and this is why I say this. So if you can move all of your ordering to 1, maybe 2 distributors max, you're going to have purchasing power. You're going to have volume. Distributors don't make anything. They ship. They're shippers. They're like the Amazon of the food world. When you can move more of your sales, more of your purchases through them, they're incentivized to give you better pricing for that, because they have to pay the people who drive the trucks, unload the trucks, the gas for the trucks, the leases for the trucks. They have overhead. And the more boxes they have on a truck for you, the more profitable that delivery becomes. The more profitable that delivery becomes, the better pricing they can give you. It's kind of as simple as that. The great thing about it is that it gives you predictability in pricing. So when I say you negotiate a contract with them, the contract should and could include things like cost plus pricing structures. So if their prices go up and you're on a cost plus 5%, they charge you an additional 5% on top of their last PO cost or their last purchase price. So there's no negotiating. There's no need to look at the pricing or try and get better pricing. You've got it locked in at that. And now you know what it's going to cost you. So that's a really big piece. The other chunk of that, though, that I think a lot of people miss out on is the rebate program. Yep. So again, it's very easy to get 2 to, let's say, 5% rebates from your distributors when you've got volume to negotiate. And what that fundamentally is they don't reduce your invoice costs. It depends on how you negotiate this, but it could be quarterly or yearly, that they will give you a check that replaces the 2% or 5% of your purchases, and it's just a check. You as an operator, you can do whatever you want with that money. It goes right to your bottom line. You can put it back towards food costs if you want, but it's an incentive that they provide. I don't generally recommend you doing your recipe costs with those rebates in place. Don't do
No, definitely not. Use that as an additional, it's an additional bonus. That would be classified as other income on your P&L, or just go to Tahiti, either way. But the point is, that's not financial advice, by the way. But what I was going to say is, I used to get 5%, and I was with a franchise, and we used a different distributor for some of our products. And when I had my 4 locations, like all ordering from the same place, basically I got 5% back every quarter. And so all of a sudden that would just be like, boom, check shows up, you go cash the check, everybody's happy. And so that's something we did there. And I do know that from the franchise, that's how they negotiated their deals, because they were ordering for 200 some stores. And so I remember being on these calls at negotiating between like cost plus 3.5%. They were like, should be 3.5. They were trying to get it down to like, 3. I think they were trying to get up to 3.7. The vendor was, and anyway. So, but the point is like these small, tiny margins is what they were really trying to move, because that's big dollars when you look at, the average shipment being, $5,000 to $10,000 a week. And all of a sudden, like it's big money at the end of the day. So over the course of a year and 200 locations, we're talking massive money. So, anyway, so I think if you haven't done this, it's an easy call, because they're going to want to keep you. And then if they say no, talk to the other vendor.
That's right.
And then when you get an offer from them, you go back to the first one and say, hey, this is what they're offering me. Just wanted to double check that you don't want my business anymore. Simple as that. I think we actually had someone do this. How much did you say they were saving right now? I think they got 3% back, which is like, how much is that?
I've got bigger success stories even than that. But yes, a phone call, one meeting, and I don't want to give out too much from their volume, but they, let's just say they do about $200,000 in purchases a year, which isn't massive in the grand scheme of things. But with a phone call and a meeting, they got a 3% rebate set up overnight.
Yeah, it's $6,000, I think.
$6,000.
Yeah,
$6,000 right back in their pocket. Yeah, that they didn't have before.
And for the average restaurant owner that is either making less than 5% margin or losing money, $6,000 could, in some cases, could literally double their current profits. Like I know there's a lot of owners that end up with, like 10,000 or 20,000 on the bottom line. Well, $6,000. Well, there's 50% profit over one phone call, right? What we don't understand is that stuff like this goes straight to the bottom line. Same thing with a reduction in your food costs. You save $1,000, that goes straight to your bottom line. And if your bottom line's already small, we're talking about massive moves that make you more profitable. So that's why this stuff is so huge. So I love that. Yeah. All right. So that's number 3. What's number 4?
Okay. So this is another relatively easy one to put in place. But if you don't have, so we've talked about mitigating, food cost from portion control. We talked about the raw cost control. Here's the other piece is sometimes your cost of goods, you may not have a food costing problem. You may have an ordering problem. And what I mean by that is I often hear owners, operators come to me and say, I'm changing my order guide, or I'm setting my PARs for my winter volume. If you're in a boat where you do something like that, I'm going to tell you today, stop doing that. You should be building an order guide that is tracked over at least multiple orders to take a look at what is your carryover, how much food is sitting on your shelves not being used. If you're ordering 6 cases of tomatoes and 2 carry over before you place your next order, then wouldn't it have been nice to have not purchased those in the first place? What happens when we don't have regular inspection of order volumes is that, I'll tell you this, when you have full shelves, over portioning is going to happen. Theft is going to happen. Yeah. Waste is going to happen because we're bursting at the seams with cash. And when you go into your cooler and that thing is full to the brim and it's an order day, that's the money that should be sitting in your bank account as cash flow, sitting on your shelves, rotting.
You don't want to be thinking like, where am I going to be able to put this stuff that came in, right? Because if you do that, you're probably going to look at your bank account and say, well, where'd the money go, right? So I want to jump into this a little bit, because I remember in training my managers to do ordering and, getting them, I swear it always happened. It's like they would have multiples of the things we didn't need, and they wouldn't have any of what we were running out of. And I'm thinking, how the hell is this happening? Like, why do we have 5 of this product that's going to, like, literally, this is going to sit here for a month, and yet we're out of stuff on the line right now? What is happening, right? And so it perplexed me and I'm like, well, how do you not know? And I think looking back now, we didn't have a system set up to actually do it like we now train our clients to. I didn't even have that back, when I was hands-on training people on that stuff. Granted, my regional manager did it later, but it was a constant thing. And all of a sudden, we would have someone go in there who had a little bit more skill, would go in there, and all of a sudden, we would have $5,000 or $6,000 magically appear in our bank account over the next couple of weeks because we just ordered less, right? And so I relied on the skill of an individual to do it. But what you're saying now is that you actually have a system. And from what I've seen, it's a pretty simple spreadsheet, literally just to track while you're ordering how much is left. And I believe it has what the par is on it, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yep.
And then that kind of dictates what you should order. And it's just a very simple formula.
That, to me, that's the key. So anybody, I could go into any one of my clients that has a true order guide, like a detailed order guide in place, and I should be able to go and count what they have on hand, subtract that from the par, and place an order for the variance between those two things. So if you got one case of romaine and your par is 2, we have 1, we need 1. It's kind of as simple as that. Yeah. The great thing about order guides, though, is, or I think a best practice, and I think it's worth mentioning here, is that having an order guide with pars that's the first part, but you want to be able to track it over multiple orders. So in that example of the romaine, if every time whoever's placing the order counts and there's 1 case of romaine left over every single time, well, then what does that mean? It means we're ordering a case of romaine more than we need. Yeah. We probably have cut romaine on the line. We've got this unprocessed case we're going to receive today or tomorrow or whatever. Don't order it. And I think the problem often shows up for people when they have, chefs or whoever's doing the ordering. They get into this rhythm of, I always order chicken. Okay, well, think about it like if you were going to a grocery store and you always buy milk and you're just going to buy milk. You don't know what you have at home. You're just going to buy milk because you go through a lot of milk. I better buy a milk. Pretty soon you're going to have 3 jugs of milk sitting in your fridge going bad, and you're going to throw it out. And you could have used that money to, pay your rent or your mortgage or whatever it might be. And I know that's kind of a silly example, but I will tell you this, that I recently went through this with a client who, her cost of goods were actually not bad. They were probably 10, 12% a little higher than we would have liked to see. Yeah. We put in the order guide, we trained it, we, made sure the pars were being tracked. 2 weeks later, as we started to tighten these up even more, she was reporting a reduction in her cost of goods by the exact 12% that we were seeing her over. There were a lot of other systems in place, but we couldn't find this last 10%, 12%. Once this was in place, her shelves were, not bare, but appropriate. And it was a reduction in her weekly spend by 12%. Massive.
Yeah. And I think to add one thing to that, I'm thinking of as you're going through it and as you're seeing it over multiple orders, it makes it that much clearer when you need to adjust the par. Because all of a sudden you can start seeing, hey, if we're left with none over multiple, maybe we need to jump it up by 1, right? Or, so like it allows you to do that on the fly and actually understand as things are changing for you. So I think that's just a brilliant idea. And how many times do we go in and do an order just because we need to do it quickly? And there's 100 other things that we're thinking about. And so we default. Yeah, we just default to like, we'll probably need that. We'll probably go through it. Okay, I just need to get it done before, shift starts or whatever the case is. Like how many times have, you done that or have I done that? So all of those things just add to dollars on the shelves. And we don't think about it. We don't think about it because here's the thing. I want to really point this out when it comes to food cost. Like say you do 100,000, let's just say you do $1 million a year in volume. 1% of $1 million a year is $10,000. So if we're tracking our costs weekly and we see our food cost is like a little bit over our target, or if we don't even have a target, which is a lot of people, but if it's 1% over our target, we're like, it's just 1%, no big deal. At the end of the year, that's $10,000. If it's 2%, that's $20,000, right? Would you rather have that go somewhere to your vendors in the garbage can, to employees, like wherever the case is, and not in your bank account? Probably not, right? So what we have to understand is that we might be talking about small percentages. Small percentages over a year is big dollars in your bank account. That's the key to profitability. As they say, a penny saved is a penny earned, and we've got to look at that stuff to find these little holes that we don't think about where our profit just keeps leaking through. So I think that's a huge point. Okay, let's hear the last one, number 5.
Well, it's almost like we planned it, but when you say, those little holes where the money pours out, I mean, my number 5, I could probably give you 20, but my number 5 is really that. It's the little holes, right? So portion control. If we don't have recipes, number 1, if we don't have any of these tools that I've already mentioned, portion control almost becomes moot guesswork, right?
Yep.
But portion control is massive. Now, I don't think most operators are gonna go in and pay somebody to weigh out portions of lettuce and weigh every protein and put their fries in little baggies. If you can do that and you can afford to spend that labor and it works out, hey, give her. But here's the thing about portion control: it can be a lot simpler than that. There are techniques that we train to our clients, and I talk about all the time. Things like reverse scaling. So if we are going to portion 30 portions of chicken, we're not going to have a bag on a scale, put some chicken in, put it on the scale, lift it up, put chicken in, take some out. No, we're going to put a container of chicken on the scale. And if we need a 2-ounce portion, we're going to take out 2 until it says -2. And we're going to put that in a bag. That's 2 ounces. Now we go -4, hit tear. So that's just one idea of a technique. The other big thing is anything that can use a scoop or a vessel for portion control in the moment, I highly recommend that. Weighing cheese out into little baggies, don't love it. But if we can find the right tool, the right scoop, for example, where if we try to over portion it, it's like, I want you to heap this scoop up. I want you to try and over portion it. And then we're going to test it. If over 10 or 20 tested portions, it works out to the total usage, that's your new portion control.
Yep.
And you're going to train people to heap it, because training people to level it off and know that there should be a millimeter of visible ring around. Come on, get out of here. That's going to take forever, and they're going to screw it up. Heaping.
They're just going to actually, you know what? I had never thought of that until this moment, and I absolutely love it. We should base our portioning off of what people are going to do anyway. Because if we're too specific, a lot of people in the moment are just going to default. So what are people going to be doing anyway, and how do we design our processes around that so that we still win?
100%.
Love it.
Less on the process, more on the tool, right? Like you're going to use the tool the way you're going to use it, so here's the right tool for that job. The same thing can be said for things like fries. Find the right, plastic deli cup or whatever that when you scoop it, that's a portion of fries, raw costed fries. So you need 5 portions, 5 scoops. Don't portion out your fries. I don't recommend you portion out fries. It's a nightmare. Find the fastest way to once again manage those things. And now here's the thing about portioning. So I could talk about a whole bunch of different techniques when it comes to portioning. But what I would throw out to you as the big chunk here is, I talked about things that are quarterly, that are weekly, that might be bi-yearly or even 2 times a year. Portion control, though, is a daily practice. We can roll out a scoop, but if the wrong scoop is in that insert, they're going to use the wrong scoop. If they don't know what tool to use for this or for that, they're just going to use the next best thing. And if the right tool isn't there, you know what cooks will do? They're going to use their hands, or they're going to guess. They're going to eyeball it, right? Like your example of John with the giant hands. Yeah. And that's going to cost you money the moment it happens. So there has to be a process in training first to train it. Second of all, there should be a line check process in place where we're looking to make sure our tools are in place. And then third, there needs to be an audit system where we're actually looking for those portion controls. We're weighing portions of chicken, or we're making sure that they are heaping the ladle or the scoop for the cheese, because if they are leveling it off, that's going to impact our consistency as well. So we don't want to save money in portioning by ripping off the customer or ruining our consistency. We just want consistency. We want to hit our target, because that's the value proposition of these dishes. So that's what I would just throw out. There has to be something every day to manage portion control, and that's behind the bar or in the kitchen.
So let's use an example of this for me. I'm sure you've probably heard my cucumber story at some point or another, but this is one that I just was flabbergasted by, because I walked into one of my stores and I just watched one of my employees as I was walking by. They were doing some prep. They were prepping a cucumber. Now, as you know, most people at home, when they cut the edge off a cucumber, now for those of you who are listening, you probably can't see it, but just picture like, an inch or so or inch and a half off of each end of the cucumber. Just picture people at home, they don't really care about that. But this dude, literally, but an inch and a half off of both sides of the cucumber, just trying to cut off the tiny little stem or whatever, right? So he chops these things off, and in the case of cucumbers, there's 12. And so he does this for the 12 cucumbers. And I just see it there on the green cutting board, and I go over and I'm like, buddy, what is this? I line them all up, and it is more than the size of a full cucumber. So I'm like, dude, we just wasted one cucumber per case, right? And a case only has 12. That's like, almost 10%. And so I did the math. I'm like, hey, bud, I pulled out the invoice from our last veggie delivery, and I pulled it out. I'm like, hey, case of cucumbers is whatever. We order approximately 11 cases a week. And I went through that, and I'm like, here's how much this is at the end of the year. And I calculated the wastage of, just about 10% of that. And so I did the math on it, and it was like $3,500 or $4,000, something like that, when I did the math. And he was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's so much. Like, I just do this with my cucumber. I'm like, yeah, but you use like one cucumber a week, we use like 100, like it's very different. So I went through that and I showed him how much you actually had to cut off. And then I literally showed him like the tiniest little amount is all you have to cut off. Now, granted, these were younger kids. They probably thought I was crazy. But the thing is, it's the little stuff that matters, right? Because we've already paid for that cucumber to get in there. Now we're paying you to chop it. And now we're paying you to then go and throw it in the garbage. Like, that's a pretty expensive cucumber by the time you think about it. So one thing that I used to do whenever we were having a waste problem, I actually used to have everyone prep everything into a bin, and the supervisor would check it over and check to make sure there's not a whole lot of wastage more than necessary. Like literally, my managers would go through the garbage cans. Sounds weird, but when you have a food cost problem, it's in the little things that matter, right? Like we used to have these Cambros come back from the line, and they would come back and there would be like, 5 or 6 olives left in the bottom of this Cambro. And then of course, people would wash the dishes, and then, that would end up in the grease intercept. Anyway, a whole bunch of problems down the line we can talk about, but these, 5 or 6 olives that are in there. And so I would literally pull the employee aside and say like, hey, was there anything wrong with these particular olives? Is there a reason that we're throwing them out? And I'm like, and they said no. And I'm like, okay, well, these olives are literally the most expensive olives that are in our restaurant right now. Do you know why? And they're like, no. And I'm like, because not only did we pay to receive them, we also paid you to prep them. And now we paid you to take them out there on the line. And now we've paid you to take them to the back. So like, it might only be 10 cents, but how many times do you do this a day times the number of products that we have? Like that adds up. Even if it is $50 a day, well, let me dig out my calculator here. Even if we say $50 a day, 365 days a year is $18,000, right? It doesn't take much to find these little bits of savings. And then I think that's what's so crazy, because most of our employees don't think like that because it's not their money, They aren't that conscious of it, but we train our people. And the big piece I wanted to get into this is we need to have that accountability mechanism to make sure that our employees are following the consistency. They are following the processes that we have laid out. And because even if you have processes and they're not followed, what the hell good are they? Right?
Not at all.
Exactly. So to note, like to kind of end off here, the 5 ways to reduce your food costs that we've talked about today. There's obviously many more. So we have costing your menu, number 1. Number 2, we have a market analysis to ensure your pricing is correct. Number 3,
vendor distribution agreements. It's a nice, easy one to do. Phone call and an email. A phone call and a meeting, guys. It's that easy.
Perfect. Number 4 is having a correct order guide with par levels and carryover on it. And then number 5 is portion control and management consistency. Beautiful. Beautiful. Awesome, Nathan. Well, thank you for being here today and hopping on with us. I know that everybody's got a few things to work on now after listening to this. But what I want to leave everyone with is the devil's in the details, or more specifically, the dollar is in the details when it comes to your food costs. So I hope you guys have a much more profitable day, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, guys.
This episode is brought to you by Ownership Training, where we help restaurant owners increase their profits while spending more time with their family. And if you want to know exactly what it would take to grow your profit margin to 15% and beyond while spending more time with your family, my team has a few spots open this week for a free 15-minute restaurant assessment call. Just click the book a call link in the description and we'll show you the exact frameworks we're using to help our clients do this in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.